You're right.
Before you sit down, you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to provide is the whole truth.
Yes.
And I'm really enjoying our time today. And then Ms. Blanks, before you do your brief direct, I know Mr. Kerlinger's testimony refers to various studies on pages 4 through 8. And again, will you let me know where on the docket I can find them and follow along? Because I'm sure during cross.
I'll do my best. I would hope that whoever is
Okay,
crossing him can also direct us.
sure. But do you know generally where those studies are in
I
his
think
testimony?
so. I was kind of flipping through the actual
Okay.
binders.
Okay, is it in the the December 2018 updated application?
I believe so.
And also, before we actually begin with the direct, I know that Mr. Van Clay had pointed out previously that there are studies referenced within Mr. Kerlinger's testimony that are not currently in the record. Are we going to address that issue now before he actually testifies?
I'm planning to mark 2 of those as exhibits. That will get those 2 into the record. On the third one, I'm not going to have any questions, so I don't plan to introduce that as an exhibit.
Okay.
Is it, maybe just 3?
I mean, there's several studies referenced in pages 4 through 8.
Yeah, I believe all the rest of them are in the record.
Okay,
And as I question the witness about those, I will provide you with the locations of those studies in the record.
okay, perfect, thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you. Do I need to make an appearance again? Okay, thank you. Could you please state your full legal name for the record, sir?
Paul Kerlinger.
Dr. Kerlinger, you have a document in front of you marked Exhibit 22. If you could take a look at that.
Yes,
What is Exhibit 22?
this is a copy of my direct testimony.
Do you have any modifications or corrections to that?
No.
Your Honors, I move for the admission of Exhibit 22 pending cross-examination, and I tender Dr. Kerlinger for any cross-examination.
Thank you. Mr. Van Clay?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Kerlinger, where do you live?
I live in Cape May, New Jersey,
How long have you lived there?
20 years.
Where did you live before that?
New York City for 5 years.
Have you ever lived in Ohio?
No.
Other than your work on the project that we have the hearing on today, have you conducted any other work related to birds in Ohio?
Yes, I have.
Okay, could you give me a general overview of that work?
Yes, I worked on 2 different wind projects in Ohio. One of them was in Logan County. We did pre-construction avian risk assessment for that project. I don't know what the status of it is. And I worked on the LEEDCO icebreaker project for a number of years, starting in 2008, I believe. And I did avian risk assessment for that, and there's other pieces of work, pre-construction work for that.
For either of these other 2 projects, did you personally do any field work related to bird studies?
No, I did not.
Have you ever done any field work related to bird studies in Ohio?
No.
Other than work-related activities that involve birds, do you watch birds for recreational purposes?
I do. May I just realized I didn't complete the previous answer. May I do that now?
Sure.
Although I didn't personally do the field studies, I directed field studies at the Logan County site, and some for, and then there was one other project, Green Energy Ohio hired my firm to do a feasibility study, and I directed a field worker for that as well.
But you didn't do any field studies yourself in that project?
No, I did not.
Right, so with respect to the question that I had pending, do you watch birds for recreational purposes?
I do.
Okay. And have you ever watched birds in Ohio for recreation?
No.
Are you aware of a natural area near Lake Erie named McGee Marsh?
Very familiar with it.
How did you become familiar with McGee Marsh?
I did a study for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and that ended up being used by the nonprofit organizations that either own land or control land or do their programs on land in that area from Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge west, several miles, McGee Marsh, and other parts of what is called the Black Swamp. I did an economic study of bird watching in that area, what the impacts were. I did that in 1993, 94, and that was used for conservation purposes in that area as well as elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Can you generally describe the economic impacts of bird watching in that area?
When I did it, there were fewer bird watchers because it was the mid-90s. It's increased since then. I've read about it. It's a multi-million-dollar industry. It benefits the local communities as well as the agencies that are doing their activity in that area as well.
Are you aware of the reputation that McGee Marsh has nationally with regard to bird watching?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and what is that reputation?
It's a very good bird watching place during some seasons of the year.
And what seasons are those?
Spring is the most important, and other seasons are generally less important, although there is bird migration through that, Lake Erie shore area in the fall as well.
What is the general pathway that the birds follow during the spring migration in order to get to McGee Marsh?
The birds that arrive at McGee Marsh are generally part of a broad front migration from, a lot of them come across the Gulf of Mexico, Mississippi, all the way to Louisiana and Texas. And as they go north, they're spread out across the landscape. This is called broad front migration. You can read about it in my second book, how birds migrate. And as they come north, they're spread throughout the landscape until they reach the lake, or within a mile, maybe 2 miles of the lake, which time some of them descend, others continue to migrate as a broad front over Lake Erie towards Canada. Those that are dropping out at the shoreline tend to congregate in those narrow forested or marshy areas right on the edge of the lake.
Is that what makes McGee Marsh such a good area for bird watching?
I believe that's part of it.
Or what's the rest of it?
It's the marshy habitats and the forested and marshy habitats that are in that area right there along the coastline.
Is McGee Marsh an example of what you would refer to as a stopover for migrants?
It's a stopover, correct?
What is a stopover?
The stopover is a place where migrants stop over during migration. They descend and they distribute themselves in those local habitats so that they can rest and forage safely away from raptors, for example. And it's a fairly common phenomenon. One of the reasons I live in Cape May is because it's a great stopover area and it's good bird watching.
If I could just seek a clarification, is McGee Marsh in Ohio?
Yes.
So the birds that stop at McGee Marsh arrive there from a generally speaking from a southern direction. In other words, they're flying south to McGee Marsh.
Generally speaking, from the south. It could be from the southwest, it could be from the southeast.
And you referred to the, I think you said the broad, what was it, the term you used?
It's called broad front migration.
Okay. Are you familiar with where Seneca County, Ohio is relative to McGee Marsh?
I am.
Okay. How far is it between McGee Marsh and Seneca County?
I do not know the exact distance between McGee Marsh and the lake shore, but I do know it's about 10 miles from the northernmost part of this project area to the southernmost extension of Lake Erie.
Okay. And McGee Marsh actually is located on the bank of Lake Erie, correct?
Yes, it's farther to the west.
Okay. So part of the, or at least some of the birds in this broad front migration fly over Seneca County.
All of Seneca County is covered with broad front migration, as are counties to the east and the west.
Okay. With respect to the stopover areas, do the migrating birds choose those areas based on the habitat?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that, please? I missed
Sure.
something.
Yeah. When the migrating birds stop to rest and forage, do they select a particular type of habitat in which to do that stopover?
They do.
Okay. And what kind of habitat do they select?
It depends on the bird species here in question.
Okay. So let's take, for example, passerines. First of all, can you give us a definition of what a passerine is?
Passerine is what's called a taxonomic order of birds. These are called the songbirds. Things like black-polled warbler or white-throated sparrow are different examples.
Okay.
Small birds in general.
Yeah. So with respect to passerines, what kind of habitat do they choose for their stopovers?
It again depends on the species. It's a wide variety of habitat, although the primary habitats are forested or at least brushy habitats.
Okay. And McGee Marsh is full of that type of habitat, correct?
It has some. It's not extensive habitat there though.
Is part of the reason why migrating birds stop over at McGee Marsh the fact that it is on the southern bank of Lake Erie?
Part of the reason they do is, yes, I believe.
And why does that fact that it's on Lake Erie matter or produce more stopovers by the migrants in McGee Marsh?
Lake Erie is a water crossing, and depending upon the time of night that birds encounter the lake, they will either cross it, if it's early in the evening, because these are all nocturnal migrants, I assume you're speaking of. They encounter the lake, and some will drop out, especially later in the night, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, they will drop out. Early in the evening, you will get some of them dropping, I'm sorry, if it's early in the evening, birds from the south will continue out over Lake Erie, going directly to either Michigan on the other side or all the way to Ontario. So they're reluctant to cross at certain times of day, and that's why they drop out in that area.
Mm-hmm.
It concentrates those birds right near the shoreline. It's a fairly vertical descent when they do that sort of thing.
Do they use McGee Marsh to rest before the rigor of crossing the lake?
Some do.
Okay. I believe that you just stated that at least some of the migrants will drop out vertically to get to McGee Marsh. Is that what you said?
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
It's a fairly steep descent. This has been monitored in different ways, but in short, birds that want to stop, if they encounter the lake, for example, they drop very vertically. I've watched this on the Gulf of Mexico, and birds arriving from Mexico, they do that sort of thing.
Okay. Do some of the migrants descend gradually before a stopover?
On occasion, some will.
Okay. With respect to stopover habitat, do you know what the relative abundance of suitable stopover habitat exists in the project area for the Republic Wind project?
I missed the first part, I'm sorry.
Yeah. We were talking about the quality of habitat for the stopovers. And my question is whether you know how much abundance of stopover habitat is available for migrants in the Republic Wind project area.
Yes, I do.
And would you explain that, please?
Yes, approximately in the documents that I'm referring to, some of those that for the studies that I read, it's about 85% of the area within the project boundary is tilled agriculture, which is pretty much the opposite of forests that birds like. So in other words, less than 15% of the entire boundary. If you look at the footprint of the area, I believe the environmental assessment said it was 97% of the footprint was tilled agriculture. So in other words, there isn't very much habitat area-wise for those birds, and the forests that are in that site are very small, quite small. In other words, if you look at a topographic map or Google Earth, which I've done, those are isolated patches. So they're not really great for migrants.
Mhm. So what does that mean with respect to how many migrant birds will use the project area as a stopover?
It means that relatively few will, small numbers, much smaller numbers.
What distance does a migrating bird passery typically travel between stopovers?
It varies. Some only 40, 50 miles. Others 300, 400, 500 miles. Depends on where they are. If there is an obstacle to migration, like the Gulf of Mexico, they're by farther obviously because they don't swim very well. Lake Erie is another one. But if the weather is not very good, if the winds aren't good following winds, they'll only fly short distances if they're over land.
How far can a migrating bird, while it is flying, see a body of water such as Lake Erie?
It's an interesting question, and I don't know the exact answer to that because there are lots of variables.
Okay. Is it possible that a bird passing over the project area or actually approaching the project area can see Lake Erie from that location?
What location?
From just south of the project area?
I don't know. I don't know the visual capabilities of birds migrating in the dark, so I'm sorry I can't answer that question.
Okay. Do you have any idea how many people visit McGee Marsh per year?
I don't have that number in my head.
Do you know that people from all over the United States watch birds at McGee Marsh?
Objection. One, I'm not sure why we're having all these questions about McGee Marsh. It's obviously not in the project area, and Dr. Kerlinger also is not here to testify about economics or how many people visit an area that is not in this project.
Well, it's my line of questions so far have been relevant for two purposes. One is to show that the birds flying over the project area use that pathway to get to McGee Marsh, which is probative of the fact that they do migrate over the project area. The second reason is that as the applicant's application shows, the economics of the project are a factor in the board's consideration of this application. And to the extent that the project may kill birds that otherwise would be enjoyed by the vast population of people who come to McGee Marsh to watch them, that is relevant to the economics of this project.
I'll allow you
I would say, first of all, Dr. Kerlinger has already testified as to migrant birds migrate over the entirety of Seneca County. That's already been established. And again, Dr. Kerlinger is not here to testify about the economics of the project.
So, Mr. Van Clay, I'm gonna give you some brief leeway. I'll, let you ask some more questions about the McGee Marsh and let you finish with that topic.
Okay.
But we should move on soon.
Sure.
And, as Ms. Flint pointed out, the witness can't answer any questions about economics. So make sure you don't ask any questions about that. And I'm sure she will have objections if you do.
Yeah, I was not intending to ask any more questions about economics,
Okay.
other than the one that was pending.
Do you need the question reread, Mr. Kerlinger?
Yes, please.
Okay, Carolyn, if you could please read back the question. Thank you.
Question, do you know that people from all over the United States watch birds at McGee Marsh? I can speak up louder, sorry. Question, do you know that people from all over the United States watch birds at McGee Marsh?
From the study I did, I know that people travel, I don't know if it's all over the United States, but they do travel to McGee Marsh. And, yeah, that's it.
Have you personally visited the Republic Wind project area?
No.
Have you personally visited the Emerson West project area?
No.
Could we get, I'll visit that topic later. Your report, or your testimony in this case, lists a number of studies that you have reviewed for the purpose of your testimony, correct?
Yes.
And if you would take out your testimony, I would like to refer you to answer 7, starting on page 4. And that answer goes through page 8, correct?
Yes.
And answer 7 contains a list of study reports that you reviewed for purposes of your testimony.
There are study reports in there, yes.
Okay. Did you review any bird study reports relative to the Republic Wind project or the Emerson West project, other than those listed in answer 7 of your testimony?
No.
Are you aware of the existence of any other study reports?
Are you talking about empirical field study reports? Is that what you're
Yes.
referring to?
Yes.
I don't have any knowledge of others that are directly applicable to the project.
Other than the information contained in the reports listed in answer 7 of your testimony, have you received any information about the birds in or near the Republic Wind project area other than, I better start over. I lost my microphone and that was a
I'll grab it
distraction.
better, yeah.
Why don't we just go off the record for a second so that we can replace the battery?